Hello, everybody. I hope your week is going well. Today we are going to be in Philippians 4, and specifically we're going to look at verses 8 through 20. Paul's closing his letter with a final admonition to the Philippians and an expression of gratitude. So let's first look at the admonition, then we'll jump into the expression of gratitude, where we'll look at some hermeneutical issues, or rather some applicational issues in regarding interpretation. So first of all, the admonition. Philippians 4, 8 through 9. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. And what you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So, I read it slow and read it again in a moment. If this passage was taken seriously by us, how would this change our daily lives? Thinking about it. Think about what we put our minds to each day, what we focus on. Think about the things we read, we watch on TV, the music we listen to. And I don't want to get legalistic. I want to interpret this or apply this in light of what Paul said in the previous chapter, where he said there that he strives. Let me read the passage to you. He strives to lay hold of that for which Christ laid hold of him. Remember that from the video you watched earlier in the week. Paul is striving to lay hold of that holiness that Christ laid hold of him for. Remember, God saved us to make us like his son. I know that's becoming a mantra you're probably tired of hearing, but he's developing the heart and character and mind of his son in us. And so Paul strives to grab hold of that. So I can't help but interpret this passage in Philippians 4:8 as one method he has for keeping that zeal alive for pursuing Christ and his purpose for us. Let me read it again and think about your daily lives. This really convicts me. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. The definition of think about, the Greek word there, it means to give careful thought to a matter, to consider, to ponder, to let one's mind dwell on it. This can take us back to Romans chapter 12, which is not part of this course, but where Paul tells us to renew our minds. Do not be conformed to this world, be transformed by the renewing of our minds. This is probably one of the best verses on how we do that. What do we put our minds to? What do we ponder? What do we think about? What do we dream about? So, that was the admonition. Now let's talk about Paul's expression of gratitude towards the Philippians. And in this, we'll have a lesson of interpreting passages in their context. There's two passages that in this context, in this section here, that possibly we've forgotten their context, or rather we've ignored them. But two catchphrases we say all the time, or Christians say all the time, I can't speak for you, that possibly we're ignoring the context and misapplying them. So, the first one is the famous quote, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. It's in Philippians 4:13. We'll read it in a moment. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. We sometimes use this as a blanket promise that God will strengthen me to do whatever I want to do. God, I want to accomplish this. I have this promise here. You'll do all things to strengthen me. Or I can do all things because you're going to strengthen me to do this. Well, is that really a blanket promise? Is Paul giving us a blanket promise about life and when I want to accomplish something for myself or for my family or my job or in my career or building wealth or whatever it is, that Christ will strengthen me because I can do all things through him? Well, let's look at the context. Verse 10, I rejoice in the Lord greatly now that at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. So we're going to go to 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 in a few minutes. But you see, Paul, the Philippians were financial supporters of Paul. They loved Paul and Paul loved them. This is probably one of the most personal books Paul writes. And he has great adoration for the Philippians and their commitment to him. Let's read about that. Verse 11, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. Key word there. I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. So there's our context. There's our context. And so instead of us applying it to whatever situation we want to do, let's consider what Paul's context is. Paul has been commissioned by God to preach the gospel to the Gentile world. He has been called. He has a calling. He was not a volunteer. He was commissioned. It's very important to understand Paul's psyche in this. Listen to 1 Corinthians 9, 16 and 17. Paul says this, for if I preach the gospel, that gives me no ground for boasting. I don't get to boast about the fact that I'm preaching to the Gentiles. For necessity is laid upon me, he says. Woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. Next verse. For if I do this of my own will, I have a reward. But if not of my own will, I am still entrusted with a stewardship. That's how Paul saw his commission. He saw it as a calling, a commission, a stewardship to go preach the gospel. There were certainly times Paul was tired of it, didn't want to do it anymore. He was brought through hardship at so many times. I mean, we can read 2 Corinthians chapters 11 to 12, where Paul talks about being in hunger, in want. Listen to verse 27 of 2 Corinthians 11. He was in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. This is the life Paul lived because he was obeying the commission given to him to preach the gospel to the Gentiles. I don't want to say Paul was grudgingly doing this. He wasn't. He was happy or joy-filled to obey God. But this wasn't something he came up with and said, hey, God, bless me, because I know I can do all things through you who strengthen me. No, he was following a commission that was very hard. And it was in that commission that he says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So how does it apply to us then? Can we apply it to us? I believe we can. But we need to apply it in the sense when God calls us to do something. And think of what God called Paul to do. Paul is this unknown Jewish rabbi, a Pharisee. And God calls him in a miraculous way on the road to Damascus. It says, Paul, I'm sending you to the Gentile world. Paul didn't even like Gentiles. I'm sending you to take the gospel to the Gentile world, and you're going to preach the gospel to the ends of the earth. And as Paul understood that was Spain, actually, because Paul wanted to get to Spain, which was the farthest western point he was aware of. So Paul steps into that commission, seemingly an impossible commission. One man taking the gospel to the ends of the earth. Well, Paul stepped into it. It was a calling, it was a stewardship, and he stepped in no matter what it cost him. If you remember, I talked about last week that he gave up all things for this, all things, maybe possibly even a family. We don't know exactly for sure, but Paul says, whatever God calls me to do, I can do through him who strengthens me. So we can't apply this verse to whatever I want to do. I will ask God to strengthen me because he'll do all things through me, or I can do all things through him who strengthens me because I want to get a second job. I want to go on vacation. I want to do whatever silly things we will apply this verse to. Let's keep it in context. It's talking about the calling of God upon your life, upon my life, to accomplish his will, which is often very hard. And in Paul's case, hunger, cold. Read 2 Corinthians 11 and 12. To see all the hardship Paul went through to be a faithful minister of this stewardship he was given. Now, for the expression of gratitude. And we'll look at the second quote that we might have forgotten the context. Philippians 4:14. Yes, it was kind of you to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving except you only. If you went to Acts 16, Macedonia was the first country Paul came into in Europe. And Philippi was the leading city of that country. So When he left there, he said, no church entered into partnership, and that is the word koinonos. We know the word koinonia, fellowship. This is koinonos. It's the masculine form referring to a partner. No one did that except you, Philippians. Even at Thessalonica, you sent me help for my needs once and again. Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. And now here's our phrase. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and glory in Christ Jesus. To our God and Father be glory forever and ever. So once again, I've heard this so many times when I want to accomplish something in the world that costs money. Well, my God will supply every need of mine according to his riches and glory. And we're pulling out something that has a very specific context and applying it to a situation as though God is some kind of ATM machine that will supply my needs for my plans. And maybe I'm overstating it there. Maybe we don't always use it that way, but I've heard people say it that way. So let's look at the situation of the Philippians, of which Paul is telling them that God will supply their needs according to his riches and glory. And by the way, God's riches and glory are endless. It's the old expression from the Old Testament. My Father has a cattle on a thousand hills, meaning he's infinitely wealthy. Okay, so let's go back to 2 Corinthians now, and we'll see the context when Paul says, when I left Macedonia, only you shared with me. As Paul traveled, he was traveling through Europe in this missionary journey. He went to Philippi first, then down to Berea, to Thessalonica. He gets down to Athens, goes to Corinth and then Athens. And as he's doing this, he's collecting money to take back to Jerusalem where there's a famine. And he's telling people, the Jerusalem church doesn't have any food. So as he's coming, he's collecting money, and eventually he heads back to Jerusalem to give that money to the Jerusalem church. That's the context of 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9. And Paul, trying to encourage the Corinthians to be generous in this contribution for the poor in Jerusalem, is using the Macedonians, the Philippians, as his example of generosity. So let's listen to their situation, of which out of that same situation, they were generous to Paul. And where Paul gives his beautiful expression, God will supply all your needs according to his riches. So listen to 2 Corinthians 8, 1. We're going to read from 1 on. We want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. Remember, Philippi was the city within the country of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. So, a severe test of affliction. They're being persecuted for believing in Jesus. Paul's asked them to be generous to the Jerusalem church. So, out of their extreme poverty, their generosity overflowed, it said, in a wealth of generosity on their part. So the Philippians gave beyond their means, as it goes on, verse 3. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means, of their own accord, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. So let's read behind that. Paul's asking for a donation. The Philippians go overboard and give more than they can actually afford to. They've given beyond their means. In other words, they need to live on a certain amount. And they said, we'll do without. We'll do without our basics so someone else can have what they need. And it says, begging us earnestly for the favor of taking part in the relief of the saints. Why would they beg him? Think about it. Why would the Philippians beg Paul? Because I know what Paul was saying to him. I've said it before. He's saying, you guys, this is too much. You can't afford this. You can't put yourself in need so other people can have what they need. And they're saying, Paul, please take our money. Please take it. We want to do this. We want to have the satisfaction of knowing we were instruments of God to help other people, and we'll go without if necessary. I remember one time I was raising money I was working for a Bible college and had to raise my own support. And there was this widow in our church that committed $60 a month to help raise support. what I was raising was more money than she lived on. And I went to her. Her name was May. I said, May, I cannot accept this. I cannot accept this. I make more money than you do. I can't take money from you. And she just kindly but sternly said, Tony, God told me to give it to you, so you have to take it. It was incredibly humbling to receive from somebody to meet my needs when in fact I was better supplied than she was. So I understand that feeling. I understand what Paul is trying to do here. Philippians, you don't got to do this much. Please, Paul, take our money. So we know this. They're being persecuted. They have given beyond their means to put themselves in need while someone else had their needs met. That is the context. So, can we claim this promise? God will supply all our needs according to his riches and glory. Yes, we can. But let's make sure it's because we've put ourselves in a position of generosity to somebody else that has less than we do, and we go over and above and beyond, some tongue twister there, in helping someone else and putting ourselves in need, but then God will supply our needs. Because we chose to put ourselves in need to help somebody else, which is not required, it's voluntary. God will supply our needs according to his riches and glory. So we can't outgive God. And that's not a prosperity gospel thing. That is about sacrifice and watching God bless. So those two things, an admonition to focus on that which is honorable, lovely, and pure, and etc., and an expression of gratitude where we have two phenomenal truths. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and my God will supply all your needs according to his riches and glory. And now we understand the context for those. So there'll be some discussion questions on this. So I look forward to interacting with you. And have a great week. And next week is our last week. So we'll talk to you then.